Hello? You can hear me? Perfect. I will put the headset on also, so I... Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? No. Please put your headset on. Yeah, great. So I can't hear myself, which is a good thing in that sense. So welcome, everybody. And you're here for the Understanding Business Contributions to Nature Positive session. We have a very exciting, very diverse agenda, and looking forward to starting now. My name is Clea Kaske-Cook. I'm Director for Policy and Advocacy, Food and Nature at WBCSD, and I will be the MC for this session. It is an incredibly important agenda, and as you can see, and as you saw with the announcements over the past days, we have seen the topic of nature and positive grow a lot and getting a lot of attention, not just from the business community, but also increasingly from governments and also civil society organizations. Today is another mini milestone on the roadmap to Nature Positive, as we will be launching a one-page infographic to milestones in business understanding of the global goal. We have prepared a presentation for you, so let's go please to the next slide. Oh, I can do that, sir. We will be using a Slido presentation. You can access that on your cell phone. Enter this code, hashtag 606011. You can write your questions here. You can submit answers. We will have a Q&A, and we want to make this as interactive as possible because we have a very large virtual audience joining. I can check how many people are joining, and we'll let you know in a moment. But it is streamed live on YouTube. Your kids, your families can see you, many others too. So I wanted to pay attention to that. So what are the objectives of today's session? This session is to inspire businesses to advance on their nature positive journey. We want to increase understanding of the global goal for nature and its implications for business. We want to learn more about the nature positive building blocks and how they can inspire greater business ambition and action across different value chains. I have been in sessions with Nadine and others in the team, and I have really seen how they've put these building blocks together, over 100 now, with conversations with business community. So let's learn more about what this means, and also to be inspired by other companies, by peer companies, on why they are taking action on nature in their operations in respective value chains. We have a very esteemed and high-level panel here of business leaders, and looking forward to hearing from your contributions. This is our agenda, and I already referenced this. Gavin Edwards from WWF will be giving a presentation on why the global goal for nature. Then Diane Holdorf, WBCSD Executive Vice President, will share a few comments and slides about what does nature positive mean for business. This will then be followed by a business panel, Nature Positive Value Chains, moderated by Marco, Capitals Coalition, together with Arup, NL, and Rabo Carbon Bank. And we will finish with comments from Erin Billman from the Science Based Targets Networks. Erin, thank you for being here, about what is next for Nature Positive. This is the agenda for today, and we are looking forward to starting. Let's start with a Slido. Where in the world are you based? I'm going to take my cell phone so that I can see the results. I'm not actually multitasking. I'm checking here. So I'm on the Slido. So please enter, where in the world are you based? We have currently 17 people in there. I cannot see the results for some strange reason. So I am just asking for the answer in the system. Modern technology sometimes doesn't work, so they will let me know. You can, that's great. For me, it wasn't showing them. Based on this, our participants are from London, Switzerland, Glasgow, UK, Portugal, Finland, Cambridge, Brussels, Sweden, very European-based. Oh, California. We have somebody from California, which is really nice. Look at the time difference. But the biggest number that comes up is London. I will go into the next one because maybe it's showing up now. It's not. So the results were not showing up on this presentation here, but thank you again for allowing me to read them off the phone. That worked really well. I'll go try it now. Let me see. What does nature positive mean for you? Would love to hear your thoughts. I am getting some results. Regenerative, both halting and reversing the loss of nature, no harm to nature, improving biodiversity, a future, creating value with nature as assets, living in harmony with nature. A lot of results. I'm very happy it works now, so that is good. And I have been starting to get the first questions into the chat. So once we finish this, I will also briefly, maybe later when we do the panel, mention the questions. So thank you for keeping it so interactive. We have over 17 responses now. And now to the next question. No more questions. So we can start in a moment with Gavin, but I just wanted to make sure we have all the results coming in, which we do. So, Gavin, I would love to hand over to you. Gavin, you have a strong, long-standing track record in conservation success. You're currently with WWF as Global Coordinator for the New Deal for Nature and People. And I understand you were part of the original group when the idea of the global goal was conceived. We're really looking forward to hearing more about that and learning from you. We have a brief video to share that you have sent. So I think we will start with the video, and then Gavin, looking forward to your presentation and to your comments. Thank you.
Yep. Does that work? Can you guys hear me? Good. Strange with the silence out there, but we'll get used to that. So thank you very much, Claire. Thank you very much to WBCSD, Diane and the team, for convening the event today. I'm going to be opening the event with a little bit of a history of where the concept, the idea of Nature Positive came from, why it was born, and how it can be used. So about a couple of years ago, people started thinking, in informal conversations, we have this kind of North Star for where we need to go on climate, 1.5 degrees Celsius, well below 2 degrees, net zero emissions, and it has become this unifying call that people can get behind with their individual actions and a way to somehow measure as a whole how that adds up. And for nature, that did not exist. There are many different concepts out there. A lot of people said nature's much more complicated. It's not possible to bring everyone together and to unify in the same way. But we thought, you know, the movement for nature is missing something without that unifying concept. So we went essentially on a search for what that could be. Now, it's really important in a search like this that it's something that is not done, you know, by somebody off in a room somewhere, but it is co-created and co-owned. There are plenty of ideas out there in a conference or a congress like this. You'll hear a lot of different ideas. Often that's diffuse. So as important as coming up with the idea would be the co-creation of the idea as well. So a number of organizations got together, a number of CEOs, and just started having this informal conversation. Back in December 2019 was the first meeting. These are some of the organizations. Others have got involved since then as well, and around this idea of a unifying concept for nature. Takes a while, this. It's not something you just kind of suddenly land on and say we have the answer. Looking at it from a lot of different angles, looking back on climate. You know, for those of us working on climate in the 2000s, having big arguments and conversation, is it global warming, is it climate change? Who cares about temperature anyway? That's never going to catch on. I remember having some of those conversations as well, and learning from climate. Essentially, after many, many conversations, the first iteration of this global goal came out. The idea that there should be zero net loss of nature from 2020. We should be somehow net positive by 2030 and full recovery by 2050. This is a dinner in Davos. Johan Rockström and Marco Lambertini from WWF presenting the idea to a number of people and seeding it. Moving in the right direction, but not particularly memorable, but having a little bit more integrity to it in terms of the thinking behind it. The group carried on from there and carried on iterating and discussing. And it's funny, for there's one or two people here, Diane, Mark, Erin has been involved in some of these discussions as well. I went through the notes and figured out when was the moment when someone said, I have the answer. And it really bubbled up. It really, you know, a lot of people bouncing ideas and finally circling around and landing on the concept of nature positive. That was then, after much brainstorming around it, put together and substantiated in a paper, which was then launched in May 2021, which explained in a fair amount of detail what the goal is, why the necessity for the goal, a little bit more rigor behind it as well. And this was at a point where we started socializing the concept externally around the world as well. What is nature positive? If I had to put it in the most simple terms, I would say there should be more nature at the end of the decade than there was at the start of the decade. Doesn't get much more simple than that. You know, you could explain that to your grandmother, to a taxi driver. Really simple. Of course, there's a lot of complexity inside that. For example, there is what inflection points are we using? 2030 is an inflection point here. nature is much less now than it used to be. So you'll see there's a little kind of the graph is much lower on the left side than where we need to be in 2050. The idea of living in harmony with nature, full recovery of nature. What does that look like? Where do we dial that back to? In climate terms, you look at pre-industrial emissions. Nature, much more complicated. So the concept itself also raises more questions that need to be worked on. But the simple idea and the inspiring idea, because I think we all thought it needs to inspire action as much as it needs to give us a sense that we're making progress towards the recovery of nature as well. So that's the idea in a nutshell, nature positive by 2030. Now, as important as it is to have something that's, that has some kind of science behind it and some thinking and some direction and some measurability, is repetition as well. So very early on, we started encouraging many actors to get out there and promote this and to use this. And I think partly because of the way it was co-created, partly because in particular the business sector, WBCSD, World Economic Forum and others, jumped on the concept very early. We saw the finance sector do the same as well. We saw more the partner organizations begin to amplify it. And we thought, you know, a lot of the original challenge was, I haven't heard this before. I'm not sure about this. Through repetition, as the same with 1.5 degrees Celsius, the repetition itself has helped cement the idea as well, to the point where now we're getting presidents and prime ministers tweeting it, organizations, partner organizations really embracing it, and many more examples as well in the SBTN's interim guidance. You'll see it there in the G7 Nature Compact that was agreed a few months ago in Cornwall. It is central to it as well, not only become net zero, but also nature positive. And you're also seeing it hopefully pop up around a climate COP as well here in Glasgow too. And that tells us that it's starting to really take hold, a more fundamental hold as well. So that's the idea in a nutshell. There are some more challenges in this idea as well. Of course, measurability is one. You saw in the video there some pointers on measurability, on species, on ecosystem health, for which there are some databases, but more needs to be done. It's not going to be as simple as CO2 equivalents. We all know that, but we're not shying away from the idea itself, and we're going to push towards figuring out how to substantiate measurability as best we can. There are also challenges in here around, is this a system-level concept? Is something for the whole world, like 1.5 degrees Celsius, or is it something that an individual actor can be? Can I be nature positive, or am I contributing to a nature positive world? It was developed as a system-level concept, and I think work needs to be done on defining exactly what it is. Am I contributing to it, which is the way it was designed, and what can I do as a company, as an entity, as a government? Could a whole government shift its whole country towards something along these lines? These are all questions for which answers are being worked on and iterated on. So while the concept itself is not preciously owned and people are co-creating it, there is a core of a definition here and an agreed definition as iterated in the paper that was published. So that is it in a nutshell. I just want to put that idea out there and put that idea out there online as well. For businesses and the finance sector, for governments, we think this should be a big part of the Convention on Biological Diversity's mission. It's North Star for 2030 as well. We certainly think that will help with governments. It will also help with the private sector as well to see it agreed multilaterally. That's all work to be done in the next months, and it's really great that we've got this session here to figure out what the building blocks are so that every business can contribute to this lofty but absolutely necessary and fundamental goal that's been laid out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gavin. Really practical and very memorable. So thank you again. Now looking forward to welcoming Diane for her presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Clea. And Gavin, that was so great. It was so exciting to hear you lay out the history of the work that we did together, WWF, WBCSD, the Capitals Coalition. I mean, we had so many people, as you saw there at that table, to say, how do we bring a point of a a goal to this nature conversation that everyone can rally behind, like we have in climate. And the momentum that that has generated has been amazing. And as I reflect on this COP, the first climate COP where nature is truly an integrated aspect of how we're talking about solutions and what we're really framing as the crisis, speaks, I think, to how far we've come on this integrated agenda of climate and nature action. Having a net positive goal as an overarching aspiration is really, really important. We know that we have to get there together. We know we've had a lot of conversations around what these tipping points are. Gavin, you put the slides up there. They're even more clear, I think, what it means to be nature positive, what it means to be regenerative. There is increasing understanding, but there's still a lot of challenge around what's it going to take to get there. What's it going to mean to be nature positive by 2030? We know the science-based targets are underway. Erin will speak to that shortly. But what can we do while that important work is underway to really start to set frameworks and guidance in place to make progress? This led us to think about how do we create a roadmap that business can follow that's consistent, that is ambitious, that is credible, and is aligned to the developing science-based targets and this overarching intention of nature positive by 2030. None of us had that answer. So what we did is came together again and had a series of nature positive dialogues. We had over 100 stakeholders and participants in those conversations, more than 30 businesses at the table for those conversations, to say, how do we take very specific next steps to embed this into our business strategy, to understand the implications for us as businesses, and to begin to make these steps necessary, aligned with what we've learned from the climate journey, to begin movement towards nature positive. And that led to this series of building blocks, which is great because it simplifies the process. It aligns it to what business is familiar with already from this climate journey, allowing us to accelerate it on the nature journey because we're using the same approach, but getting a lot more momentum possible because we have clarity around how to move together. So these building blocks were, first, assess and prioritize. For some companies, this was relatively easy. They really understood where their impacts, their dependencies, as well as their opportunities were for how they depend on natural resources for their business, but not all. So this ability to get to what is material, what is our nature footprint, thinking about the climate footprint journey, was really helpful to say, okay, now we understand really where our operations are. Are we in high-risk protection zones? Are we in zones that need to be improved from a sustainable management standpoint? What are the water resource implications where we're operating? And begin to really think about the implications for that. That then takes us to the building block of commit. What is the ambition? What are we going to commit to as business? And for members of WBCSD, this was particularly important because in 2020, we established an additional set of 5 membership criteria, one of which requires all of our 230 business members to have set nature positive, science aligned, and informed targets on nature made public by the end of next year. So we needed to be able to have momentum, and it's not the membership alone here, it's all of us working in partnership to know what do we have to commit to and act on. That then allows us to measure. Now, we still need the science-based target translations, but there are KPIs that we can all line behind right now to begin moving down the path that we know is coming. So we needed to have validated and importantly interrelated measures because of these points of connection across the natural systems that we can really use to inform decision making. With all of that in place, it sets out much better clearly specified actions that each business can take within their value chains and within the sectors to begin to develop roadmaps for action and implementation. And from that, then we can track progress. And once we're tracking progress, we understand if we're achieving the transformations that we've set out to do with this work. None of that is as impactful if it is not being transparently reported with some kind of consistent governance framework. And that is the 6th building block, because we have to get to consistent reporting, aligned reporting, and we've got to move to connecting it not just to the science-based targets, but also to the financial and non-financial disclosures through entities like TCFD and TNFD, the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, so that investors and capital markets can understand whether this actually is delivering good risk management and good financial performance indicators. So these are the 6 building blocks that we've been able to put together in partnership with all of, many of you here, of course, as well as others. And what this will then lead to is very specific roadmaps for, if you think about the decarbonization journey, we've got decarbonization roadmaps, the race to zero, et cetera. This allows us to put into place the roadmaps to nature positive. There are 3 key sectors we know from the reports that came out last year that have the greatest impacts and dependencies: the food and agricultural systems, the built environment, and the energy sectors. Now we take these building blocks that every company can use and begin to translate them in a faster way for these big sectors to make sure that we can take aggressive action in mitigating the risk and creating opportunities. So we're excited to have the public launch together with all of our partners on these building blocks. We're going to continue the conversation and the dialogue and what this means and how we bring it to life. The next one is on December 2nd. We hope that you all will join us and invite others to it, because it's only through continuing this dialogue and beginning to really put understanding into place, moving beyond awareness to understanding, then to action, that we can actually make the progress that we so desperately need. So I'm going to hand it back over to you, Clea, for our next series of Q&A on this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Diane. And you can see, I mean, the amount of work that has been going on, led by the team. It's been impressive. I had joined some of those stakeholder consultations, and it was so much fun to hear all these different businesses come up with ideas and solutions and having discussions about those building blocks for nature positives. We are doing very well on timing, but still we need to move ahead. And in particular, we have received a few questions from the audience that I wanted to ask. And in particular, we should maybe use those questions for Diane and Gavin, since you already had the beginning. I just want to give the opportunity for Oliver Camp from the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, had a question: how fundamentally can or should we expect businesses to change? Can we go as far as fundamental shifts in product portfolios?
Yes.
That's a short answer. It's good.
I mean, the answer is not yet, though. And that's where I think the challenge lies. So this is the objective of what we need to be able to get to, because then you start to have, first, business transformation, sectoral transformation. When you begin to be able to embed it into product portfolios and deeply understand the reporting and the footprint and opportunities, as we do for climate increasingly, where there are also, by the way, still information gaps, as we start to move that scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 impact thinking into the nature positive region, we'll be able to get to the types of measures that will understand product level impacts and opportunities. And this has so many implications, not the least of which is it allows us to have a more sophisticated conversation with consumers. So that's why the answer is yes, but we're just not there yet.
Thank you. We have one more question for Gavin from Tom Lewis from WRAIP UK. What's the right balance between mandatory and voluntary approaches to corporate incentives?
Big question. Well, I think in a larger theory of change, having the private sector, progressives in the private sector, trailblaze, solve these issues, show that it is possible to be profitable, to run a business that is in harmony with nature, that is and consistent with a 1.5 degree pathway is a really good step. Eventually, you may end up with new norms and regulation coming in once you've got those early movers. But the people that say you just need to regulate to solve this, I don't think that works. Only relying on the private sector, not every company will necessarily play ball. So we need that shift of companies. We need new norms to be created. And then perhaps there will be and is a role for regulation. Given that this is an existential challenge, that would be fair. But be careful about how you do that. Introduce that, but also not too pedestrian either. Time is against us. So the quicker we can scale up some of the building block embracing and implementation by companies, the more quickly the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosure can move, the better. We may well see more regulation in the future.
Thank you. Another question. How might we envisage how the professional services sector can contribute to the nature positive goal? I would ask both of you.
The professional services sector has tremendous influence because of the client base and the guidance being provided at a strategic and operational level. And by embedding these risks and opportunities into that strategic consulting that they're offering through their services, they start to make this part of the regular business conversation. And that's what we need to do. We need to not have this be a sidebar. This needs to be an absolutely integrated part of how businesses assess its strategic opportunities, its material risk management, its reporting opportunities, and its operationalization of its business strategies to make sure that not only is it addressing the climate emergency and its effects on their business, but the nature emergency as well. And this doesn't even get us into the justice and equity conversations that are also inherently part of this. But we need to begin to really bring this integrated business thinking forward, and the professional services companies sit at the forefront of that space.
And maybe to add as well, the transition that needs to happen is fundamental to every single part of a business. There are going to be some kinds of business companies and business models that are going to benefit very quickly from this. Others that are going to have to start fundamentally reassessing their business and reorienting their business as well. I always think that when we're on the forefront of these kinds of changes, the professional consulting and services sector should not be far behind, should be very close. There will be many opportunities to help facilitate that rapid change.
As a brief follow-up to this, are there any practical case studies or examples you could share about as inspiration on what companies have done, organizations have done? We've seen this great example, we know how everybody came together to help define nature positive, but other examples?
So there's a number of companies who made some incredibly ambitious commitments in this space, but more importantly are already backing that up through the work that they're doing. I'll just mention three. Wholesome, which is a cement company, who's made some, so they're in this built environment space, one of the three big sectors. They have made tremendous progress in understanding what their impact is, but increasingly also what the opportunity is for their business, and they've tied that into absolute performance goals and commitments for action. One example. Second example, Walmart, huge global retailer. They've put in place, as they did with Gigaton on climate, the same guidelines and KPIs for all of their global suppliers to understand their nature footprint and to begin reporting that and demonstrating progress year on year on nature as well, with very specific targets in mind. Third example, Rabo Bank. We're going to hear quickly, but moving into enabling the carbon connection point of valuing nature-based solutions is a key part of the financial mechanisms that we haven't actually spoken about too much yet. And Barbara, I know you'll be speaking to this a little bit more. That's just like off the top of my head. There are so many examples actually of where this is beginning to already be moved into business strategy and plans and operationalization.
Yeah, I mean, I could point to some WWF partnerships with HP and others as well, where we're also trailblazing too, but I think Diana's examples were perfect. Yeah.
I will then have the final question, which is, what type of accountability framework should we put in place to ensure transparency and avoid temptations of greenwashing?
This is huge, and we know that this is one of the big topics here at the COP, actually. This ability to track and understand and report with transparency is going to be key. I'd just like to call out the work that the Global Commons Alliance is doing on this by developing a multi-stakeholder engaged accountability mechanism that speaks to every part of the total cycle of business, investment, stakeholders, funders, et cetera. That creates some consistency in how we think about this, but then governance has to be able to be moved into consistent KPIs, consistent reporting frameworks, and that's where things like the science-based targets and the task forces for financial related disclosures also begin to come into play. The announcements this week of the ISSB are also going to have a big role to play in this governance piece. So there's a lot of different elements. They all have to line up together.
Yeah, I think we're in a different world now as well, where there's a lot more criticism, there's a lot more action under the microscope than ever before. Organizations like ourselves are very sensitive to this as well, because we fundamentally want to work with the private sector to solve the problems that we set out in the first place to try and solve. Greenwashing, there's some legitimate criticism. There's some criticism which may be unfair as well. I think any company that's doing the right thing, unfair criticism will just fall by the wayside. If your actions are good, if they're aligned with some of the emerging thinking coming out from science-based targets for nature and the work at WBCSD, then I think it's an issue that will not be an issue. Actually, will only be an issue for your competitors that are not taking action.
And with that, I would like to thank you. Thank you for your insights. And thank the audience, virtually, and the audience here for making this so participatory and engaging. So thank you very much for your contributions. And we're now going to be moving into the next part of the panel. I'm just looking for there it is. We had the Q&A. We're now going to be moving into the panel conversation. And I would love to introduce our panelists. So just a moment. I'm figuring out the technology here and the various tools. We will have a panel presentation to hear in practice what nature positive means to companies from a range of different value chains. Built environment, energy and finance related to land agriculture and forestry. And finally, we will also hear from Erin Billman from the Science-Based Targets Network on future plans for nature positive and concrete actions business can already take now. Okay. So let me briefly introduce introduce all the different panelists, and also ask you, if you can, to please come up here. So just a moment. I would just like to start. So maybe we will, Barbara, would you like to please also come up? Barbara is the CEO of Rabo Carbon Bank. Thank you, Barbara, for joining us. And I will not go through the whole biography and everything, but just it's great to learn from your experience, and especially in your current role as CEO of Rabo Carbon Bank. We have Joe Da Silva, who's the CSO of Arup, joining us. Joe, thank you for being here. We really appreciate it and looking forward to your contributions. Mark, please also join us. Mark is the CEO of Capitals Coalitions and will be the moderator of this conversation. So actually, I'm going to pass on to him in a second. Just want to mention that Christiana will be joining virtually, and there she is. Thank you, everyone.
So thank you to everyone. I'm going to sit at this end so I can see people here as well, if that's all right. So the journey to develop this nature positive, and I've just lost my headphones as well. The journey to develop this has been really, really exciting. You can't hear me. I can't hear myself either. Can you hear me through there? Oh, I'm sorry. Let me start again. So, mine's shutting off as well. coming together to develop something like this is a great example of collaboration between lots and lots of different organizations, as you've seen. To get to the point where the Columbia stand here at the COP is got nature positive very clearly in big letters is an amazing step forward. And I think several of us were talking, several of the CEOs were talking just before this, and we weren't necessarily that hopeful that nature would have been embedded into it. And talking to most of the others over the last couple of days, there's a real sense of optimism. I think the WWF report, 92% of the national declarations that are being made are containing nature. Now that is really, really impressive. We've really succeeded here, but the challenge I think we've got is what does that actually mean? What do we actually do? And that's the question I've had again and again over the last couple of days, is how do we actually do something within business to actually achieve nature positive? So that's what we're going to be talking about here in this session here. So the Capitals Coalition is very much focusing on that bit about measure and value. So there is an internationally accepted framework for nature. There's one for social and human. We've integrated them already around the food system, around built environment and energy, those three areas. So there's already frameworks to help us to get to that impact. But the building blocks are much bigger than that. So I'd like to start maybe with you, Joe, and ask, so how is this going to affect what you're doing in your organization, these building blocks? Is it going to help?
Thank you. Yes, Arup is a professional services firm that focuses on the built environment. And like most firms, we're on a journey. We've made sustainable development absolutely central to our strategy. A lot of our focus over the last bit has been on climate change. And we have now got that embedded in our business. And nature is our current new priority. And we hugely welcome the building blocks and all the work really that's been done in this area, because it's providing us guidance. Businesses don't have time to all individually climb up learning curves. The speed at which you as a community have got together and created a common direction has been really helpful. The fact that it's so clear, nature positive is something that people can really get behind, and that makes a real difference. Where are we on our journey? As I said, we've made a commitment to put sustainable development goals at the heart of our strategy. That means that on all the projects that we design, all the advice we give clients, we're thinking about the outcome for people and the outcome for the planet. And that is a big shift. As engineering firms, we tend to think about outputs. As a professional services firm, you tend to think about the output you're creating for a client. We want to look beyond that to shared value for people and safeguarding the planet. Rather as with climate, we are tackling that at three levels. We got in a bit of a muddle with climate initially, with the pressure to be a business and to set business targets and not focus on, so that's focusing on our corporate footprint, which is very important if you're a manufacturer, but if you're a professional services company, it's actually your handprint, not your footprint. It's what the difference you make through the projects that you do for your various clients. And we do thousands of projects every year. And then the third, and so we're saying that we do need to look at our corporate footprint through our offices and things, but it's the difference we can make through our projects. And that is really making nature absolutely central to every single project. How we measure that is work in progress. And given the diversity of our business, that's a challenge. I spoke to Wholesome. It's in a way much easier for them. They do one thing, they produce concrete. We advise a very wide range of clients, but we are really making huge progress. And we're seeking out clients who really want to do this with us. And finding clients who want to do things like the Wild West End project, which is one of my favorites, which is working with developers to actually put diversity back over a whole area of London, on roofs, on walls, on plant boxes. It's involved the community as well, and actually creating those essential corridors. And that's really what we're finding inspiring about it. Unlike climate change, which is an existential risk, most people my age have seen the 70% loss in biodiversity. It's real, and they want to do something about it.
I was really pleased you mentioned the Wild West End. You may not know, I was at the Crown Estate heading up the strategy, so that was one of the things that I brought in there. Going to go to Christina now with the same question. So how do we actually build these building blocks into what you're doing in your organization?
Hello, I think you can hear me, first of all.
Here? Yep.
Okay, it's perfect. First, thank for having me and sorry for being in remote mode today. What I want to say is that I fully support the view that private sector can contribute to implement NATO positive goals as well as carbon neutral goals. And this effort is paramount. What's more, I also want to say that I think that business require a long political view and frame to build a common roadmap to implement this in the market. From Enel perspective, Enel is a utility which is present in more than 30 countries and has a capacity of renewables of more than 50 gigawatt. The protection of natural capital and biodiversity is an integral part of our strategy. As a utility, we impact and depend upon nature capital. Therefore, we have integrated the risk and opportunity analysis in our decision process. And the building blocks that you propose today represent an easy guideline for the business in order to play the way forward. And this can be customized in all kind of specific business. Enel indeed embrace the mitigation hierarchy principle and mainstream risk opportunity assessment at two levels. The first is a global company level, and the second is site level evaluation. In both cases, we apply plan, do, check, act model to assess and prioritize impact, to define target, to implement action, and we have defined internal indicator to trace this result. And this is an important point to me. Disclosure of natural related data is a key topic in all stages of the process, and we need robust and concrete metrics to monitor this. And this is particularly important to me in this transition period where we need to add degradation to reverse the loss of biodiversity. So this is a very important issue to all of us. So this is what
Thank
I
you.
want. Thank you.
Thank you. These conferences now where we're doing things partly online, we're getting used to this a bit better now, aren't we? I'm now going to pass over to the financial market. So we've been working with Rabobank. Rabobank have been doing a lot. Obviously, you're in the carbon markets part. But a few years ago when we launched our finance work in Hong Kong, I think we had a 2,000-seater auditorium with only 30 people in it. And Rabobank's been there at the front. But it's only recently that other financial institutions have really started getting involved in this. But I'd be very interested from you about where you think these building blocks can help in the work that you're doing.
Well, first, thank you very much that I was invited here. And I think the building blocks are great because they give you indeed the guidelines if you want to move forward on this net positive, net zero and nature positive way and a equitable way. And I think that is really important because perhaps even before you start with those building blocks, it's all starting with this intrinsic motivation to do the right thing, not because you have to do it, because there's regulation or self-regulation or pressure from another side, but because you want to. And I think for those companies, these building blocks are actually really, really helpful. And another thing that's the overarching building block, the transparency, I think that's really important because for those intrinsically motivated, it is a way to show the world what they do and what best practices perhaps are. And on the other hand, for those who are perhaps still a little bit lagging behind, it is an incentive to get motivated. And in that way, I'm very, very positive about what it's part of the EU Green Deal, where we have both the EU taxonomy, where we all speak the same language now. Green means green, and you can't do greenwashing anymore. And it actually makes sure that those regulations that I don't get all of those abbreviations from my heart. So it's the sustainable finance disclosure regulation for investors, but on the other hand, for many other companies, it is the corporate sustainability regulation directive, which will be implemented shortly. And that applies to many firms, and not just to those firms, but if they want to show the world what they do on nature positive, on net zero and equitability, equity, I'm sorry, then, no, equitability, then they also have to go into their supply chain, so they take on many other firms to whom this directive may not directly apply, but indirectly it does. So I hope that indeed the ISSD announcement of last Wednesday will enhance that. Having said that, I work at Rabobank in the financial sector. We're the largest food and ag bank in the world, and we have on the one hand many farmers in our books, and on the other hand large food corporates. And that gives us a unique position, but also a responsibility to make a difference, both with capital, with finance, but also with another currency, and that's carbon. And perhaps I could tell something more about what we're actually doing, but I will do that later on once you ask me to. But actually, that's what I'm setting up within the Rabobank. That's actually the Rabo Carbon Bank, where the three things are actually combined. So I have this beautiful job where I can work both on equitability, on a social agenda. I can work for farmers, better livelihoods, better income positions, and so on. But also nature positivism, because it's all about soil health, increasing soil health, and then also about enabling both the agricultural sector but also the food corporates to go on this net zero road and really reduce and remove carbon.
You were saying there that the taxonomy is a helpful thing, and obviously the announcement of the International Sustainability Standards Board. I've been involved in conversations where there's still some challenges over the taxonomy. Are you feeling that it is something that we've now all got behind, or is it still up for debate? Because with the EFRAG and the European work and the SEC in the US, there is still quite a lot of conversation going on there.
Yeah, it's true that there's still debate, there's still dialogue, but we have now this taxonomy. And Peter Bakker always says that accountants will save the world. But actually I think that these regulations will also save accountants. Because now they have this new, very important responsibility, and they have taken on their job seriously. They are now training inside of their offices all of these accountants that think in terms of transparency of nature-related and non-financial information. And they are very much in favor of this taxonomy. And that is really what gives me hope, because they are the one that will check our information, your everybody's information. And once they start to use that and take it as the default situation and no longer start, delaying the thing by talking about it, and but simply start with what we agree upon and then move forward. And I think that's very hopeful. So yes, accountants will save us, but hey, it's also the other way around.
Accountants need saving as well. Excellent. So let's move on to the next bit of this then. So I bought some ladybirds recently, and I thought this was a really good idea because it would actually eat all the aphids, because we had tomato blight and things like that going on. Funnily enough, they all disappeared to the next door neighbour's garden. So I paid for them, and everyone in the local area got the benefit. So when we're talking about nature here, it's the same thing, isn't it? It's not within the confines of your organisation. You can't do it within the transaction that you would normally make in a business. So on your balance sheet, there has to be a transaction to make it fit onto the balance sheet. But what we're talking about here is about an enabled, so that scope 3 that Diane was just talking about is probably the most important bit here, isn't it? So how do we really bring in the value chain, supply chains to this, Joe? Because you work very closely with lots of different organizations. How do we make sure that it's not just you trying to do it, but actually we bring others in on this journey as well?
Well, I think the first step in that is actually really developing a sort of common language, so we're all pulling in the same direction.
And these building blocks are helping?
I think those building blocks do help. And I think the whole notion, the clarity of nature positive really helps. Within the built environment, what we can do as a business or what others can do in the business is very influenced by what happens up and down the value chain. We need changes.
Good morning, all COP delegates. We kindly remind you to wear your face mask over your mouth and nose at all times. During your time in the conference, unless you are seated in a room with appropriate distance, or whilst eating or drinking, or are medically exempt. Thank you for your cooperation.
If you thought we weren't actually at COP, we are at COP for those online. Okay. Sorry, Joe.
No, it's very good. I share Barbara's view about policy like the EU taxonomy gives a very clear push in the right direction. The changes to ESG finance are also making a difference. We're talking to clients who are saying, we've got different financial criteria to meet. That's making a difference. But we're also seeing that businesses kind of want to move first. Within the built environment sector, there's a real shift going on. I mean, environmental impact assessments have been the norm on major infrastructure projects for decades. But the thing is about them is they're fundamentally flawed because they assume that you're calculating the impact of a project on the environment and then taking measures to reduce that impact. And we've been trying to get across to people that actually nature positive is a sea change. It's a real step change. And it's not about, what is the impact of a project and how do you minimize it? It's starting out in a new direction, saying we're going to make this project nature positive. A year or so ago, we started that journey with projects like the A30 with Highways England, introducing nature positive, and they've now put that in their guidelines as an organisation. We've been working with the Environment Agency in the UK, who have got a big commitment to get to 20% nature positive by 2030, but they need the technical guidance to be able to do that. And so what we're seeing is this shift. On the one hand, we're completely rethinking nature in the context of major infrastructure projects, but we're also thinking about nature, working more with nature. And so that's a shift towards, I just call it nature as a partner, and developing blue and green infrastructure solutions. And a really good example of that at scale is the work that we did recently in Shanghai, where we used satellite imagery, machine learning to be able to analyze Shanghai as a city, understand the nature in the city, the open spaces, the water bodies, and work with those to develop a new drainage strategy for Shanghai. So instead of doing a sort of, you could call it traditional engineered solution of grey infrastructure, lots of concrete, lots of tunnels, which would have destroyed nature, we actually said, no, let's start by joining hands with nature and working with nature to create the solution that works for people.
They're really good examples. I love the A30 one as well. The jumpers that the team were wearing are talking very clearly about nature positive, and everyone in the team is really engaged with it. But the idea also that it's not building a road anymore. What it is building a reserve, and there just so happens to be a bit of concrete that's going through that to get you somewhere. That actually it's about a whole system approach, and like you say, from the very beginning. So how does this work in the utilities sector? How do we make sure that this, because you're a provider to so many different people, how do we make sure this is a value systems-based approach?
I believe that value chain perspective is really important to maximize the gain on nature in the development of our business, of course. Indeed, a company like Canal can measure its own direct impact, mitigate and remediate, but also we need to assess, and what we are trying to do, and cover the upstream and downstream impact. And at the present, as I said before, we don't have a common metrics and standard method to be used to this purpose. And this make difficult to engage suppliers and end user on this play. On this, what I think we need at the moment to enhance the collaboration in different sector, the value chain, is, as I said before, standard indicators, and that can allow companies and stakeholders to better assess and compare the impact and the activities to arrive to a common target. And many initiatives on this are ongoing. Secondly, we need to broadening stakeholder participation and cooperation nature positive roadmap, and this can facilitate the implementation of effective mitigation measure. I think that a holistic approach is needed to ensure equity between communities, project developers and relevant authorities to develop a project, which could be renewables construction or others. So this is very important. And I put another step. I agree that political and regulatory framework is very important, and we need a clear target and market rules for both private and public players. So this is the way to go forward on this too.
So you mentioned there about having standard metrics. Gavin and I and several others have been talking about this week, about how do we actually, do we want to have one metric that's suitable across all sectors, or is that then getting too broad? Should we be doing it by sector? Because what we're talking about here is local context most of the time. So surely we've got to put that into the local context of what's needed, but we also, as you say, want standard metrics that are consistent. So that's a tension in there. What do you think about that? Do we just go for general standard approaches?
I think that the analysis comes from the local part, because of course the context can be different, but we need some criteria to aggregate this indicator in order to give a common view. I mean, this is something that we are trying to do at the company level, which is not easy for us because we are so spread in different countries and with different technologies. So what I mean is, there should be some criteria, common criteria, and maybe for technologies or sector define specific indicator that make easier to compare and also to assess zero net loss or positive, because otherwise if we don't have reference indicator, we don't know if we reach the target really. So I mean, local and global point of view is necessary from my point of view.
Joe, did you want to come in? I saw you nodding there and then off.
I just wanted to pick up on that because it's one of the challenges we're facing. When it comes to measuring carbon, the metric is the same everywhere. The expertise is the same everywhere. But when it comes to measuring nature, you actually need, local experts. What we're finding is ecologists from Hong Kong cannot provide the advice that's needed in, say, Singapore, even though it's down the road. And so I think there's a big issue here in terms of actually managing to identify metrics that are suitable for different sectors, but also thinking hard about where is the capability and the knowledge to be able to make those measurements in a meaningful way. And that we're seeing is quite a gap. And a real challenge that collectively we need to overcome.
Yeah, there's a significant skills and knowledge gap. I know I'm trying to hire people at the moment, and there's just not the people out there. We've had announcements this week from some of the big accountancy firms of hiring hundreds of thousands of people. We've got McKinsey, Accenture, all of those others now getting involved in this, but there isn't enough people with the knowledge to be able to do this on the ground or actually to be able to do the accounting. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that one of the important roles that a government and knowledge institutions together can play is not just about these skills and this knowledge, but also about data. Because take, for instance, soil health. And in soil health, many things come together. It's about a productive agricultural land, but it's also about biodiversity. It's about water management, resilience, and so on. But we do not have data, enough data, to set up all kinds of projects along supply chains to make sure that everybody talks the same language, measures the same things, and actually build up trust to work together. Nowadays we have data systems from, for instance, farm input, farm management systems. They are not compatible. Or not just, or outside the agricultural sector too. And it only measures, for instance, that part of the soil health elements that are interesting to the farmer, whereas further up in the supplies chain, there may be other things needed. So I think that a very important role of any government is to make sure that together with the universities in that country, you set up a data set, at least on a national level or on an EU level, and in the end on a global level, because only then will we really be able to set up supply chain decarbonization programs, biodiversity programs, and so on. So I think that's really, really a missing link at this point in time. And the other thing is, you were talking about a free riders problem. Hey, you bought those birds, but they went to your neighbors. And actually free ridings, well, is something that's also an impediment to many supply chain solutions. The Rabo Carbon Bank has as one of their solutions the decarbonization of agri-food supply chains. What does it mean? We start with a large food corporate that has publicly pledged to the world that they will be a net zero emitter, let's say in 2030, and they can reduce their own scope 1 emissions, their scope 2 emissions, but then they look up in the supply chain and see that in a typical agri-food supply chain, 85% of scope 3 emissions is actually on farm level and with farm inputs and so on. So they really need those farmers and the other supply chain partners to live up to their promise. But how will they do that if there's no data, or at least not accurate data and data that you can link together and so on? And when there is this free riding problem, for instance, take a dairy company, and a dairy company invests in a reduction project with a group of farmers. But those farmers also sell to other dairy companies, and those dairy companies can then say, hey, well, that scope 3 reduction is also mine. So you really need to make sure that you set up smart incentive schemes so that only the dairy companies that do invest in those reduction projects are able to claim those reduction units, so to say. And that's actually what we're doing now. We are setting up, together with partners, of course, reduction unit systems that make sure that you can only claim the reduction efforts once you have invested in it. And that's one of the solutions. The others is that by setting up those projects and putting in smart finance so that you make sure that it's not the farmer who has to take all the risk. It's not the farmer who has to take the first loss. But you make sure that within the supply chain, there are actually guarantees there so that the large food corporate and also the bank can take that first loss. And then you enable farmers to make the change, and not just regenerative farming, but also to invest in reduction projects. That in the end, the food corporate needs to live up to their pledge. So actually, we're trying to work on those impediments.
It's what you're saying there about data, I think, is extremely important. In fact, we've got a project we're kicking off a bit later today about data and food systems. So maybe after this we can have a chat. But to get that flow of information, one of the things that someone was saying to me, UNEP WCMC did some work for us on this. And it wasn't so much that there wasn't enough data, it's that it wasn't always getting to the right people at the right time. And that was even more of a problem than going out and doing the initial soil sampling, etc. It was actually making sure that information was in the right format to get to the right people, which is what you were saying. It might be suitable for one person, but it wouldn't be suitable for everyone that needs that information.
And the data sets are scattered all over the society. And we need to make sure that it's both uniform, like a taxonomy for data, and also that it's available to everybody. Because I very much believe that we need open source data systems where everybody who has, can use that data to set up supply chain solutions is actually welcome to use it.
I'm just checking here some of the questions that are coming in. Thank you for these. So there's one here about pricing mechanisms, which is obviously close to what we're doing. How much do we need to monetize nature to be able to address it like this?
Well,
So we'll start with you.
well, as long as money talks louder than words, I think we need to do that. I wrote actually my PhD on monetizing environmental goods, so it's very close to my heart. And now I'm actually monetizing the ecosystem services that farmers provide to the world by paying for their reduction projects, their reduction units, by paying for carbon credits, that's removal from the atmosphere in their soils and forests. So that's putting a price on that. But instead of doing those kinds of pricing things, I think it's where you monetize services delivered by others. I think it's extremely important, and this is really something I'm also, working on very hard, is that every company present here at the COP, but also not present at the COP, should be thinking, what can I do to internally price nature, internally price carbon, internally price other ESG goals in my own business model. So not pay the farmer for what they do or a food corporate, what can a bank do itself? And what is at the core of the pricing mechanism of a bank? It's credit risk modeling. Mm-hmm. So, well, the nice thing is that the more sustainable a farmer is, the lower the credit risk. And once we start changing our pricing system and giving that actually lower credit risk to the farmer, then we really have a pricing system that doesn't mean that you can trade nature, but yet you can have smart investments in nature. And that's, I think, the intrinsic motivation that every company should have. And I think every company has this internal pricing mechanism. You just need to find it and change it.
Excellent. There's several questions here, Joe, about the handprint. When you mentioned that, I think that got a lot of people excited. And they're asking, actually, have you got metrics in place already? How are you measuring that?
So the handprint is a phrase we coined to really try and differentiate between our corporate footprint and our handprint, what we do through our work. On every project now, we are identifying how we are contributing to the Sustainable Development Goals, and we have also 6 principles that underpin all our work and all our decisions about who we work with, the projects we do, and the investments we make. And those principles include one which is respecting planetary boundaries and reversing the damage done to date. The idea where we're trying to get to is that on every design project that we do, we want to be in a position where we can understand, for that they're physical projects, there's a site, understand what the biodiversity sort of now is, and really seek to be proactive through the project to improve that biodiversity. To measure it and declare it means involving professional ecologists, in that project. That is time, that is money. So a big step is actually persuading the clients that we're working with that this is something that they need to do for their business. So if we're working with a client who's actually declared nature positive, or in a policy environment where there's an obligation for them to do that, then that's something that's easy to do. But on other projects, we're just doing it voluntary as a first step to be able to demonstrate that this is a difference that people can make, and that they will need to make in future, because we're absolutely certain that this is the direction of the travel. Everything in future is going to be measured in a triple bottom line around climate, around equity, and around nature. We haven't got the precise metrics yet, but even if we can start doing that qualitatively rather than quantitatively, that's a massive step forwards.
And Christina, if I can come to you as well then. So several questions here about regulated authorities, or how much of a role, and coming back to that question about voluntary and mandatory, do we really need to be with this? Is it, are we, and I know that was asked earlier on, but I'd really like to get a business view on this as well. Is it that we should be waiting for regulation here from your perspective? Or is there a lot of things, as Joe was just saying, that we can be doing now?
Of course, we are not waiting for regulation. We are moving forward because we internally have the idea, the mission to move forward. We are committed to SDGs goals, so of course we move forward. What I mean by regulation is this, that of course we operate in different countries and the regulation is different, so we have also to comply with what we have in the different countries. But also we need I would say common rules also in different countries, because we are in a competitive world. So I mean, what I want to say is that we find opportunity to have nature positive goals, of course, but we need also to have a regulation market in which we move together with the other players. So I mean, this is really important to push to speed up the net positive for all the companies. And this is my point. So some companies can be committed, but to have all the companies committed, the regulation framework has to be aligned.
Excellent. Sorry, you wanted...
To add something to that, I also don't think that we should wait for governments to come up with regulation, and I also don't think that governments should come up with very detailed regulation. But there's one thing I think that governments should do, and that is a carbon tax. And a carbon tax, I mean all greenhouse gases. That's good for biodiversity, it's good for the net zero statement, and we should make sure that it's not decreasing the equitable income position, and that takes, you need to look into that. But for instance, you can do something with lowering income taxes for lower income position people in your country and so on. But we need a carbon tax. And that is really important, because that will drive every company within the economy in the right direction.
Thank you. So we've got the high-level goal, nature positive. We're seeing that coming in very clearly here. We've now got the building blocks, a framework to help us to get that to be delivered. We've got businesses that are already doing it, and I hope that you'll all help us to keep on building these metrics, this understanding out. We're going to now pass back, I think, over to you, and you're going to close us out with science-based targets. So how do we set these targets? So if you can thank the panel.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. Thank you. Very active discussion, panel discussion, and I loved how I loved the different examples. What will definitely stay with me was a discussion around how can companies contribute to nature positive, which linked earlier to Gavin's points about what can we all do to lead to a nature positive world, and how can I be nature positive. So very helpful. We are moving into the very final parts of our session. Before we ask for your thoughts and your takeaways in a Slido, I would like to introduce Erin Billman, who is the Executive Director for the Science-Based Target Network. She will share with us a reflection on what's next for Nature Positive from the view of the Science-Based Targets Network, as well as the Global Commons Alliance. Thank you, Erin.
Thanks, Clea. Can you hear me? Great. So please bear with me as I just want to make sure that everybody's familiar with Science-Based Targets Network in terms of what we're aiming to accomplish. So like Science-Based Targets Initiative did for climate in providing the corporate guidance for companies to set Paris-aligned climate goals, Science-Based Targets Network is undertaking that parallel initiative for nature. So in other words, if you put SBTI and SBTN together, we aim to equip companies with the guidance on what it means to do your part for an equitable, net zero, nature positive future. There's a lot of complexity involved. But what's exciting about where we're at today is that we have initial corporate guidance on science-based targets for nature. The building blocks that you've seen debut today directly map from a framework perspective. We collaborated closely. So what we're aiming to do as a community is provide harmonization of frameworks and language and definitions so that we can start to coalesce in what is this complex space. And with the initial guidance for business, we have a corporate engagement program of over 100 companies, industry coalitions, and consultancies, and NL is one, that are working with us on participatory design of our methods. Today, already over 30 companies are on their journey towards science-based targets for nature, which means that they have actively mapped their impacts and dependencies on nature throughout their value chain, so not just their own operations. Again, so think about scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3, and are using some of the guidance that we've provided thus far, and more will be coming, on how they prioritize where they have their interventions. When we talk about nature, we're talking about land, fresh water, oceans, and biodiversity all together. And climate change is one of the key drivers of nature loss. So companies that want to do their part for a nature-positive future need to have a climate science-based target as part of that portfolio of action. What's next? We are part of a broader Global Commons Alliance. You heard Diane reference it earlier. A sister component of Science-Based Targets Network, the Earth Commission, is producing their first report. Think about it as IPCC for the planet next year. And that is going to be an assessment of the global commons and the tipping points, and what a safe and just corridor for humanity can look like. We at Science-Based Targets Network are relying on that, as well as on the ground taken, for instance, in the CBD process, to continue coalescing around global goals for nature with Naturepositive. We then take that and translate that into guidance for companies to set quantitative time-bound targets. Today, we already have interim target guidance available. We encourage companies to use it. Zero conversion, zero deforestation from 2020 as a baseline are examples. Absolute water quantity reductions in high-stressed areas, water quality improvements, and so on are included therein. More guidance is coming shortly from us. We are aiming to have our first methods in 2022, specifically on water, with updates to our integrated guidance on science-based targets for nature later in the year. So I would leave it at that, keep it short and sweet. Happy to answer any questions if there's anything I haven't covered that you'd like. Oh, I should add one other point. We do get asked a lot about tie-ins to TNFD. I'm excited that I just met the new executive director and technical director this week. We are working closely together. The framework around the conservation and mitigation hierarchy and the building blocks you saw today are going to be used in that content, and we will be the main mechanism for corporate input into TNFD so that TNFD can focus on the financial disclosure aspect.
Thank you, Erin.
Sure.
My audio set wasn't working, but I was able to listen carefully, and it was, so thank you. Actually, we have 3 more minutes to go, but I want to just highlight, we will go to Slido, and if you have a question for Erin, please ask it there, because let's use the opportunity to ask a few more questions in the final 2-3 minutes. If you don't want to ask a questions, any key reflections that you might have. So either a question or some reflections. And I'm just waiting for the results. Thank you for waiting 1 second while the results keep coming in. So we have some reflections, not a question yet, Erin, but maybe after the official part, people will also approach you. A long way to go. Engaging discussion. Nature positive means having more nature by 2030 than 2020. So that worked very well. How do you see the Article 6, including RED+? can a company be nature positive? Let's ask that.
The $1,000,000 question. We're not encouraging that direction of travel, at least not currently. There is not the foundation around accounting and metrics that are in place to ensure that wouldn't just be greenwashing or attempts to game the system. And so, and it also, we're talking about full system change here. So doing your part for the societal goal around nature positive is the goal. We do recognize that it is important to companies to be able to have claims. We're actively working on what those claims are that have validity and science basis, because again, we are the science-based targets network. And so for it to be credible, it needs to be anchored in information that says, this is enough. This is doing at least your part to contribute to that broader goal. And so taking it back again to the climate example, that means there are clearly established methods that say this is a company doing its part to stay within 1.5 degrees.
Thank you. I had a few closing comments, but actually the ones that are coming in are so good, I will use them instead to say thank you, because we are on time. And they were metrics and data are key. There is genuine enthusiasm and commitment in the corporate sector to become nature positive and the handprint concept, and it is important to have diverse leadership on this topic. Love seeing so many incredible female leaders on the panel. So thank you. Thank you to all, not just the female senior leaders, to everyone for this, for your contributions. I love seeing the input here. There is momentum and a great start. And please do join us on December 2nd virtually for the next session on the building blocks. Have a great rest of the day in this hopefully even more impactful COP26. Thank you.